Well, hi, welcome to Lean Blog Interviews. I'm Mark Raven. We're joined today by Keith Ingels. He is the TPS Manager at a company called Raymond, and we're going to talk about the company and the work he does and what it means to be a TPS Manager there. So Keith, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Very well, Mark. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being on your podcast today.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're here. I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation, and I think it would help the audience because I was unfamiliar until
Sure.
recently about Raymond. So, maybe before talking about some of your career path and in your
Sure.
role, if you can let people know about Raymond, and I'm going to let you talk about the corporate parentage because I think that's an interesting dimension of it.
Sure. So let me share. I'll start with a little bit of the Raymond backstory. Raymond's in upstate New York, small factory. Their big claim to fame in the material handling world, George Raymond Sr. actually patented the pallet originally, but he gave that patent out because he wanted to make equipment that moved it around. So been around a long time. In the late 90s, Toyota Corp, which has a very large material handling equipment presence, was looking at Raymond to purchase them. And they're a slow and methodical planning company. While they were looking at Raymond, BT came in and bought them in the meantime, a European manufacturer. So Toyota stepped back and thought of for a minute, and then Toyota decided to buy both BT and Raymond. So we've been part of Toyota Material Handling North America for about 20 years, and that we roll up to Toyota Material Handling Group. Most people know the Toyota automotive side, but Toyota as a manufacturer makes lots and lots of different products, one of which is, of course, a very dominant international share of material handling equipment. So, and we are a part of that chain. We focus in electric equipment in North America. And continuous improvement is a big aspect of ours. It's helped our factory and it's helping our distribution network greatly right now.
Yeah, well, it's no surprise being part of the Toyota family of companies. I think of, I've seen plenty of Toyota forklifts when I've had an opportunity to go and visit wineries and distilleries. The Toyota fork trucks are often quite prominent and used quite a bit in moving barrels or pallets of bottles around. So we do see that. But yeah, I think that is maybe surprising to many people who only associate Toyota with cars.
Yes.
And trucks and et cetera.
Yes. Oh, we make all kinds of things.
And that's interesting history. Thinking back to speaking of pallets and how ubiquitous that is, it's interesting. We might not think of that as a technology, but that was invented. It's interesting that was patented.
Yes. Well, people will join material handling, and I'm part of that logistics supply chain, if you will. But people will join and start in this industry, and they'll say, "Oh, I don't see many forklifts around." And then after you're in the business, you're going to see them everywhere because if it's a product that moves, we help move it. So and it's a lot of fun.
You see the big bold Toyota letters on the back. So yeah, that does jump out. And maybe it'd be good to hear a little bit about some of your own background, Keith. A little bit about your career arc, and did you first learn about the Toyota production system as part of Raymond?
So actually, I'm a little bit unique in that I've been on both sides of the Toyota Material Handling North America aisle. I started out on the Toyota side after many years in material handling. I had the opportunity to manage operations in the Cincinnati market for years in a Toyota-owned dealership. And then after several years there, I had the opportunity to move to a training quality role at Carolina Handling, which is our Raymond dealership. And the two brands support each other. So very familiar with Raymond and really like the product. It's high tech. It's got a lot of cutting edge activities, and I really wanted to join that group. I started my Toyota journey on the Toyota side, but had the opportunity after joining the Raymond side. We had senseis come in, and for a little over 2 years, I had Hayakawa-san, Atsuhiro Hayakawa-san was my sensei. Very fortunate to have worked with him very closely. He was very tough. And I learned an incredible amount from him. He just kept raising the bar. It's, continuous improvement, right? Lean, get better. Oh, that's good. Get better.
But celebrate maybe for a second and then on to the next challenge.
Yes, very much the thinking and the culture of it. Yes. But when you make that culture and make people realize they can do that, right? That it's within their grasp to keep getting better. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, good. We'll have a chance to explore that culture within Raymond, and the different lessons that come from Toyota, and even what you've learned there within Raymond is a slightly different type of business. So you mentioned some of that, sensei education and coaching. Looking forward now, or I guess jumping ahead to today and more recent future. Tell us about your role as a TPS manager. It's interesting to me that a Toyota company would need a Toyota TPS manager, right?
So it's a lot of fun for me. Sometimes we've started to brand it as Raymond Lean Management on our side, just for our piece of recognition. But a lot of times people will tell me that I'm teaching common sense. And I won't disagree with them, but I will challenge them back and say, well, we're trying to make common sense common practice. And then sometimes I'll get that light bulb going. So it is a system, and the strength of the system is it's developed for many years. And it's really always about simplifying things to take those small, manageable steps forward. As you mentioned earlier, keep raising that bar.
Right.
And it's not meant to be overwhelming. It's truly meant to be fun and help people understand how they contribute, what their role is in adding value to the greater organization. Mm-hmm. And, we think we know that, but a lot of times we don't understand our value add. And when I can help people see that and learn how they can make it even better, it's just such a great experience.
Yeah. Well, I've talked to a number of guests. This phrase common sense is interesting. Maybe we just kind of delve into that a little bit more, because to me, I think of it as hindsight common sense. After we've been exposed to it, people say, okay, now that seems obvious. But there are many things about, I think about TPS approaches, or if we'll call it lean, that are in some ways counterintuitive. What are your thoughts on that?
It is. For example, when we start to visualize things, one of the first challenges is getting people excited about the process. And one of the things we'll teach them is, we need to visualize it to make it apparent, right? And a lot of times we'll see them go from nothing to label everything. and we want to step back and say, does that add value? And so the rule of thumb becomes, does the visual add value to other people working in the area? And the more different people that work in the area, the more visual support you might need. And if things like that become counterintuitive, you don't want me to label everything. Label it if it adds value. And you got to think about it. Yeah. And don't want to reach for a tool. And it's not as easy as a tool. We're going to give you the thinking. We're going to teach you the method behind it, the concept. And then if you need a tool, grab the tool.
Yeah.
So.
I appreciate you saying that. I've seen sometimes people out of enthusiasm, they go overboard and they'll label everything, or they'll put tape around everything in a 5S effort. And I don't mean to mock that, but I think, there are learning opportunities that come to light where, I think of, I think expanding on your point, I think there's a different threshold and level required when it is your own desk that nobody else uses.
Yes.
Versus, say, in a hospital setting, a shared nurses, quote unquote, nurses station that is used by dozens of different people in different roles in shared workspaces. But, I can think of an example, maybe get your reactions to this, of putting a label, printing out and putting a label on a printer that says printer doesn't add much, right? I mean, I think it's chuckle, or putting a tape out.
I've seen it.
I've seen it. Maybe early days in my own lean journey, I did it, but I try to coach people maybe to avoid some of that, or to learn from it if we start getting complaints that, hey, this starts seeming silly. Like putting a tape outline around a very heavy printer, like that printer never moves, it never goes missing. Why would we have to put tape around it to show where it goes? But let's say you have 3 different printers in a shared nurses station, and there's constant confusion over which printer is which. Sure. Well, then putting a big sign that says printer A, printer B, printer C can help nurses or other people not expand their personal spaghetti diagram of running from printer to printer. Which one did it print out on?
Yes. Yeah, when there's frustration in the workplace, that's what we're trying to teach people to reduce. And you give a great example. People marked stapler on their desk. I'm like, okay, do you know that your stapler goes there? Yes. Do you know someone use it? Yes. Okay, then I don't need that visual. I had one group I'd been called out to work with as a vendor, battery company, and they were setting up a different workplace, and they had tools. They had a big tool bench, right? And they weren't sure. They'd never done the prepare the workplace, the kind of 5S thinking and to get the workplace ready. They'd never done it. And they very enthusiastically would lay out the tools, and they would try to figure it out. And then they would carefully label every tool. Then they'd decide it didn't work that way, so they'd move stuff, and they'd carefully label everything again. So they called me back in. I didn't know they were doing this. They called me back in. They're very upset with me. We're labeling this stuff like crazy. It's just not working. And I said, wait. I said, you're still vetting out the process. They said, well, yeah. I said, okay, but you're trying to have a visual to help identify where the tools are. I said, yeah. I said, could you do something easier? I said, what do you mean? Well, what if I take a picture of the tools in place and hang it up by the tools? Could you tell where the tools go? Well, yeah. I said, great, do that. Take one picture. Mm-hmm. Don't label everything. Right. You could see the light bulb. You could actually see the light bulb go off. I'm like, oh, I said, I'm not trying to make it difficult. Yep. We just need to be able to see. That's all.
Right.
And until you get it vetted out, it's going to take a while. I say, painter's tape and markers are your friend when you're first getting started, because you're going to change it. Mm-hmm. You're going to change it. You've never done it that way before. So you're going to have learning and make it better.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to your point of not making work harder, like I think we step back and we could ask, what's the value or what's the benefit or how is it helpful to mark where tools go? Because we might spend less time searching for tools. Like that's the important thing, right? And why does it matter to spend less time searching for tools? Well, our changeovers could be quicker. Why does it matter that our changeovers are quicker? Like we could continue that train of thought all the way back to purpose and goals for the company or the organization, right?
Absolutely. And we want them to learn those early lessons too, because they're going to carry forward as they become more advanced. And as they become more advanced, we teach them two different areas, just in time and Jidoka, we can refer to that as quality. So just in time and quality, and that's the customer experience. So those early lessons of visuals, they're going to carry forward. They're getting more advanced, mm-hmm. But they're still going to be there. Like ownership is a great example. I walk in a parts area, for example, recently, and I said, oh, the area is a little bit in disarray. I said, who owns it? Parts team. I said, no, that wasn't my question. I said, who owns it? Well, parts team. I said, no, follow me on this. If everyone owns it, mm-hmm. no one owns it. Who in parts? I said, you need to specify that. And the other piece is, what a great boost to morale when somebody has maybe their name and picture in that area, that this is their area. Hey, that area is taken care of. The supplies are there. The tools are there. That area stays work ready. And then it carries on into delivering that on-time, defect-free to the customer experience as they get more advanced in the process.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about not making work harder. And I saw an article a couple of weeks ago. I blogged about it. Akio Toyoda, CEO, of course, of Toyota Corporate, was teaching internally a class about the Toyota production system over in Japan. The two things came out very strongly, clearly in that article when he talked about, basically why is this important, and in whatever order. He really emphasized making work easier for people. Like that's how I was taught Kaizen, going back to Norman Bodek, who learned from Toyota people and others in Japan. Making work easier is an admirable goal, and it usually aligns with being better for the company. And then the second thing he emphasized was shortening lead times, which is that just-in-time focus, and then Jidoka and built-in quality helps us reduce lead times. I mean, this all sort of goes hand in hand. So there's this consistency in what I hear you saying in upstate New York and what your parent company CEO is saying over in Japan.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. The Raymond Network's very aligned with it. And in fact, at the factory level, years ago when they first started the production TPS at Raymond Factory, it's landlocked. It's in a small upstate New York Valley, and there's just nowhere to go, right, geographically. So they had to boost production within that footprint, and they've done that some, 2.5 times over, where our production was, about 2.5 times greater today than it was before we started that system. And it was our production's greater than they anticipated that factory output to be capable of when they calculated it. So it's been a lot of fun. It's doing ultimately more with less. Mm-hmm. I watch people get in tremendous results with this stuff, but one of the challenges is you can't let it overwhelm you. And I like that in your measure success book. How do you get metrics but don't make them overwhelming, right? That's one of our challenges as well. If you look at the entire mountain and you say, I've got to ascend to the peak, that's a daunting task. But if you just look in front of you and say, I'm going to take a step, well, I can do that. Okay, well, great. Now take another step. And now all of a sudden, after a while, you're taking steps, you're looking around going, hey, I'm going up the mountain. Then you have this realization. It's kind of to your point. It is a little counterintuitive. We think we have to jump to the top of the mountain, and that's not even possible. We can get there, but
well, it's one step at a time, and I've seen that work well in different organizations that embrace Kaizen as daily continuous improvement, small steps, baby steps, small improvements, and. I think back to one of my previous podcast guests you might be interested in, Keith, Bob Moorer, who's a professor of psychology at UCLA. And as a clinician, he went and studied Kaizen as a series of principles and practices. And he makes a lot of interesting connections to the way our brain works. And, kind of, I think the key point summary of what he's discovered, which I think would it seems intuitive to those of us who have experience with this, is that when people propose a really large change, it can become overwhelming. So if a doctor tells a patient, you need to start exercising 45 minutes a day, that seems overwhelming. The fight or flight instinct in our reptile brain kicks in, and then guess what? We do nothing. And Dr. Moore learned, and this is what you reminded me of, coaching patients to say, well, you're home on the couch watching TV, commercial comes on, get up and walk in place for 30 seconds. And then 60 seconds, and then the entire commercial break. And, and he's learned that, if we don't get started with baby steps, we'll probably never get started. And getting started with baby steps allows us then to take bigger leaps and make more progress.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said.
I'll share a link. I'll have to look up that episode number.
No, I'd appreciate that. Yeah, no, that sounds very, very, very exciting. I'd like to see that. So, yeah.
So I was going to ask you more. You mentioned the Raymond Lean Management System. And I'm curious from your perspective, is that meant to be different from TPS or the Toyota Way, or is it really a matter of the labeling and what you call it, that it's Raymond's system and you use the word lean? I'm curious if you could tell us more about that.
Sure. So across the Toyota network, TPS is adopted. So we use the expression adopt, then adapt. Adopt the system first, the way it's taught, but then adapt it to your specific needs and your specific requirement, customer experience, really. And so Raymond Lean Management is our adaptation, and it has some interesting migrations. So it's the same system, exactly, but it's our adaptation. And for example, we're rolling it out now, as is my role, to the distribution network, our solution and support centers. And we're going into them. In some instances, this is maybe a new thing for them, and they're very quality focused. But we're giving them this structure and this system to kind of speed that up, that thinking up, and implement it faster by those small, rapid steps, right? So it can be a little bit of a shift, a little bit of a change, and also, I was taught the Japanese, and so I'm very comfortable with it. But I find teaching students, American students, sometimes get lost in Japanese, and that's not the value add. If I can teach you Go and See, and you don't want to learn Genchi Genbutsu, that's fine. I need you to go out to know that you got to go see the problem for real and at the space so that you understand. So there's those concepts we march out. And doing so, we've put together some great training for it, because we don't have that immersive environment. If I walk into a Toyota facility, it's Toyota culture, right? It's an immersive environment. In some of our network, we're building that environment and starting really often at lower levels and building up. It's very exciting when they get to the point they bring customers in for tours, and customers are like, oh, this is how you do things, and they see the visuals, and then it's like, ooh, and then that really energizes them to do more. And then we try to we'll support customers when they ask, but we try to control that, because we can easily be overwhelmed. A lot of people want to do this stuff, and but we want to support them.
Yeah. So. Well, so that choice of language is part of the adapt, like you said.
Absolutely.
Like earlier when I was thinking about forklifts and wineries and distilleries, I very intentionally, I almost said like, oh, when I go to the Gemba at a winery, I'm like, well, I don't have to say it that way. I could just say it when I go to a winery where the wine is made.
Yes.
As a translation to that. So yeah, it's interesting to think about where words become a barrier. Genshi Genbutsu in the Gemba versus go and see at the shop floor.
Exactly.
Different ways of expressing the same thing. One of those sets of words might sometimes be a barrier. And so it's very situational depending on, say, the organization I'm a part of. Some people really embrace the words and say, well, these are new concepts, so we're going to learn a new word to help maybe better explain the concept. And then there's some places that say, yeah, let's keep the language simple.
Yes. Yes. Well, and to your point, one of the barriers we found, I guess I didn't really anticipate it, maybe should have, but the word production. People hear production and think, oh, you're talking about factory lines. I'm like, without a doubt, it's more famous for being on a factory line, but it's the simple thinking, getting a workplace ready. That doesn't matter what you do. And that can be at home. We talked the other day about, do you take this at home? I'm thrilled when I see people take it home because then I know they're going to bring it to work. Wherever you start and you see this stuff works, that's fine because you'll bring it to work.
Yeah.
And it's gotta be simple, and it's just gotta be within that grasp. So production would just cause people to stop. So no, I'm not a production. Back up, breathe, follow me on this.
Right. Yeah. So there's that translation from Toyota production system to Raymond system, instead of production, it's
lean management.
And you emphasize, the other thing I wanted to maybe unpack a little bit is the idea of it being a system. Like how do you help articulate system? To me implies there are interconnected pieces. How do you teach that within Raymond?
Well, so Mark, I think, we've talked a bit and you might have picked up on, I like to tell stories and share examples. And one of the things Exactly.
Except when I interrupt, sorry.
No, you're fine. But one of the examples I started using was we're trying to bring a beautiful orchestra together, right? With all the instruments playing beautiful music, working in concert together to make this gorgeous music, this magnificent experience. But I have to teach these one instrument at a time. I can't teach you the whole orchestra. I can't teach you the whole piece of music. But today we can study, the trumpet. Tomorrow, maybe the violin. The next day, maybe the flute, and so on. And people started, so you're going to get bits and pieces, and that's okay. And the other thing, Mark, I teach a lot, and I find a lot of my trainers picking up from me. I go around saying, you can't break this system. You can't break TPS. You can't break RLM. You can't break it. So people will say, I don't want to try. I'll break it. You won't break it. You might learn something that didn't work, and that's okay. And you need to embrace that because people will say, well, how did you get so good at this? So first, I'm not that good at it. I've made a lot of mistakes. That's given me a lot of experience. And I have some great stories of things that didn't work well, and I'm happy to share those.
Yeah. So let's come back to that. I got a note down here about, we'll come back to that theme of learning through mistakes. That's an important topic for me. But I was going to come back to this idea of it being a system. It is Raymond's system. Because when you talk about adopt and adapt, what happens when we talk about maybe evolution? If there are different needs within the Raymond business compared to Toyota, how much can that system evolve on its own, even if it's a slightly different evolutionary path than what Toyota is taking? Like, is part of your job to kind of reconcile some of that, or tell us about that, please.
So we'll help an area, and generally we'll start in the simple pieces, which is workplace organization, or what I like to refer to as workplace readiness, and that's really what people will term 5S. Mm-hmm. The first time we teach 5S, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Mark, people think, oh, you mean housekeeping? I mean a lot more than housekeeping. Workplace readiness, supplies, tools, and order. Then we're going to take that into, and you mentioned before, just in time. That's really flow. We want the process to flow. Whether we're delivering a service or a product, we want that process to flow. And we're going to ask really leading questions. Can we see what our day's activity is for our customer expectations? Can we see that? Is there a schedule of activities? And that doesn't matter in our world with if it's parts, if it's service, if it's rental orders, whatever that customer expectation we are fulfilling. Can we see and respond to it effectively? And then the other big piece is quality. So are we doing that customer expectation? Are we meeting it consistently and getting better at it, or worse? And do we know? And how do we know? So we've got to have those visuals and go through it. So depending on where the challenge piece is, will be where we'll give some focus. And ultimately, the other pieces will be drawn in. If you start working, and you mentioned it earlier, if you start working on just-in-time resource flow, if you make a lot of disruptions or defects, as we'll refer to them, that's going to impede that flow. So then you're going to have to start, oh, wait, I've got to improve my quality. So they work in tandem. You don't really do one without the other, but it's okay to start in one area and then kind of realize and draw in the other areas. So that's how we start to teach it. As you said earlier, we're trying to make it easy for people, because if we start to give them the system, there are books, there are libraries on this stuff, and we'll blow them apart. Yeah. Our objective is to make them realize they can contribute and be part of this, even at the earliest levels.
Yes. Yes. And that idea that everybody can contribute comes back to, phrases, either respect for people or respect for humanity, which, those phrases are used a lot by Toyota. And challenge is a word that's used a lot as well, where I think sometimes, I want to hear more of your thoughts on this, where sometimes people maybe misunderstand respect as being easy on people. Mm-hmm. Whereas challenge, and you told story earlier about the sensei sort of, pushing in a positive direction. So can you talk a little bit more about the dynamics of how challenge is respectful?
Oh, sure. Those are two values that are really important. And the cultural piece is one we'll kind of work on. It's a little bit intangible, right? But you can feel it, right? And the respect piece is, to your point, it's not about being easy on people. It's really about helping them find their strengths and let that shine. And that challenge is part of how we do that. We're not talking about a disrespectful challenge would be blaming people, as opposed to look at the process. Right. People, in my experience, want to add value. They don't always know how. Then the other paradigm shift you get into is, if I do this process every day, I'll work into a habit, and I'll have a system, whether it's documented or not. It may be what we call tribal knowledge and not documented, but I'll have a way I do things. And after a while, I'll quit looking at that for improvement, because that's just how I do it.
Right.
So we want to challenge them to step back and look at that. I've been in customer sites all over the country beyond just logistics, and so I don't walk in these customers and have expertise of what they do. But I have an array of great questions to ask, to draw on their expertise and see what they know could be done or needs to be done, when I help them see with a different set of eyes. Mm. So that's what we do. We respect that. Who is the expert of the work being performed? It's the person that does the work, right? Yeah. So we respect that, but we also are going to draw that out, that my job, or our job as coaches, is to support that and help them draw out things that they're trying to see, but maybe just a little too close, and just back them up, breathe for a moment. Tell me, as you said earlier, tell me how to make it easier, right? That's great coaching. Yeah. Because if I say, tell me how to make it efficient, I don't get a lot of answers for that. Right. But I say, tell me how to make it easier. I'll give you a list. That list is Kaizen opportunity. That's improvement opportunity. Well, let's go through that list. Let's make some of these changes. Yeah. I wish I had, some supplies here at the ready. Okay, let's work on that. Yeah. I wish I knew when those trucks were scheduled to go out. Great, we can help you. Then it becomes this really robust conversation. So.
Yeah. And when you talk about challenge, and I think I heard you touch on this, but I'm going to ask you to elaborate. You talk about kind of coming at, let's say, if you're going into a new organization, to help them adopt and adapt. Yeah. TPS, Raymond Lean Management System. You can come at from one direction of, I'm going to teach you certain methods and approaches, but then I go back to one of the Taiichi Ohno famous Green Book. There's one chapter where the header says, "Start from need." Right.
Yes.
So where's the balance of engaging people versus looking at business objectives or challenges or gaps that need to be solved in a measurable way?
Sure. So measurements is getting those early metrics is one of our ongoing key challenge. If we're successful getting people excited to start to implement, the best way I can say, as I've observed it, is planning doesn't feel like doing. So if they get excited, they jump in and start doing. And then somebody like me will come in, or you, Mark, and will say, so how much impact did you have? Well, it feels like a lot. No. I need the measurement. So we'll start to coach them to get that baseline metric. And the other thing where we try to coach them is, one step at a time. If you implement 5 changes simultaneously, 3 of those might have helped you. 2 of those might actually have set you back, and you don't know which did what. So it's that kind of slow down to speed up mentality. Like, well, I'm only doing one at a time. It's going to move you faster. I'm a fan of moving fast. Speed is key. We'll say, but to do that, you got to slow down. I'm not telling you slow down to slow down. I'm telling you slow down so you can actually speed up.
and that's one of those things that I think is counterintuitive, and in hindsight seems like common sense to people maybe. But I think an important thing is understanding cause and effect, and this is something I've learned from Toyota people that former Toyota people I've worked with and learned from, like Pascal Dennis and others, always talking about testing and evaluating cause and effect. We have a countermeasure, we test it and see what the effect is. And to your point, if we're testing multiple things at once, that cause and effect gets confused, possibly.
Yes. Yeah. But it feels like it makes us feel good because we feel like, we're doing so much. That's maybe not a good thing. And to your point, being part of that counterintuitive, we have to teach a little bit. So and making the measurements, the metrics, palatable. A lot of times, and you know this, Mark, people get afraid of measuring things, or they get afraid of metrics, or they think it's overwhelming, and it's really not. If you can give me number of physical steps, for example, then I can convert that to time. We have formulas for that. Just give me how many steps did it take to before, and you move, like if a cabinet of tools and you moved it closer, and how many steps did you reduce, and how many times did you do it? 3 times a day times, we can figure that all out. So it doesn't have to be overwhelming. We take that intimidation factor out of the measurements, but it's one of the challenges, because let's just start doing. So planning is good.
Yeah. And plan, do, study, adjust. And that's where, or do you tend to use, so here's a terminology thing, and it's not a major thing, but like, do you say plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, study, adjust? There's different versions of that language. It's the mindset that matters, but what language do you use?
We teach it from plan, do, check, act, just because we find it the more common terminology, but I suspect, because I've heard you use adjust a lot, I actually prefer adjust myself, but I'll teach is that just so people get used to it, because it's really, and the other thing we teach is it's a cycle,
right?
And one of the things I find necessary, the analogy I use, Mark, is I said, would you go out in your driveway, start your car, and roll your car forward 1 rotation of the tires? I said, well, no, that's silly. I wouldn't get anywhere. I said, okay, PDCA, don't stop at 1 rotation. Keep going. Because that's what's going to get you there. And because they'll want to, well, I went through the whole cycle. Okay. Let's keep on that.
Not the cycle, but cycle.
Not the cycle, the cycles. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the mindset that matters more than the words. I would say, I've had chances to go to Japan. Different companies who talk about PDCA, they'll say, a very common expression, or at least through the translators, is, spin the PDCA cycles.
Yes.
And I need to PDSA. I planned. I tried to say it, and those words didn't come out of my mouth. So a defect.
Yeah. But yeah. Well, I like the study piece too, because it tells us, what have we learned? And that's one of those things. Sometimes people frustrate us. Oh, well, this didn't work the way we thought it would. Great. That means we learned something. You know, that's not a wasted effort. There's a value add in learning. So, you know, when we assess that value add, making mistakes can be very value add. So we don't always, somebody, that doesn't sound right. Sure it is. I'll tell coaches that sometimes you have to let the student struggle because that's how they learn, right? If you just give them the answer, you know, you're handing that proverbial fish instead of teaching them the fish, right? That's not sustainable. So we've got to let them struggle a bit. I'm not talking to the point of frustration, but let them struggle to go, oh, wait a minute, I see. And that gets back to your question on how do we respectfully challenge?
Yeah.
That's part of that. If we hand them the answers, they didn't learn.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's just one other thought, you know, when it comes to that language, I almost wish instead of plan do that we would say plan test, because to me,
yes,
that word test implies something that we will learn from. Where I think sometimes I've seen, unfortunately, an organization uses the language, but they think very linearly. We planned, we did, we checked it, we acted, we're done.
Yes.
So I'm glad you emphasized those iterative cycles. Yeah.
I like that test, Mark. I'm always going to give you credit for sharing that with me, but I am going to use that just so you know.
So it's part of, I guess, a high level PDCA cycle in life. We plan the language we use, we do, and then at some point we can study and adjust and say, you know, I don't know. PTSA might confuse people with the parent teacher student. But one other thing I was going to ask you about words. So there are, sometimes, and I try not getting drawn into it, but sometimes you see just these really, looks like time-consuming debates online about lean versus TPS. And there are some people that will argue vociferously that lean is different. And then there are some that will say, well, lean is just a different term that Womack and Jones and Krafzik and others use to try, just as a more palatable label. Let's say when I started my career at GM, you couldn't say the word Toyota. The word lean has its challenges. But back, I guess, the question I was going to ask you, do you view, at least the way you are approaching lean and TPS as synonyms, or is there more to it than that? How do you see things?
I always get feedback. We talk about the value add, and really the value add is from our customer. And as a coach, as a leader, an instructor, my customer is my student. So I have to find ways to communicate to them that resonate. And a lot of times I find myself saying continuous improvement, lean, in kind of a comparative. If you think of lean, really, that's leaning out an existing process, right? That's getting that resource down and the flow, really getting it right. But if I say continuous improvement, sometimes it feels like I can say, well, I may change the process entirely. I may not use a landline phone anymore. I may go to a mobile phone. It's a completely different process.
Or Zoom altogether.
Or Zoom, exactly, altogether. So how do we get our thinking to broaden? We use the same thing with our customers, and part of our education is optimize before you automate. I want them to learn to look at their process before we have some great automation solutions, but if it just speeds up the defect rate, we're all going to have a bad experience. So let's look at that process, make sure it's at least pretty good before we start,
Don't automate the wasted motion.
Exactly.
Not part of the equation with that.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, that's one of those counterintuitive points too. Well, I'll just speed everything up. It'll be great. Not necessarily.
So I wanted to also kind of make reference to, you bring up, very frequently this idea of, what is your value add? Who is your customer? And recently I had a chance to interview Steve Spear, who in his study of Toyota was able to go work and learn directly from Mr. Oba, Hajime Oba, who just passed away in September. He was very famous as, among other things, he created the TSSC organization, Toyota, originally called Toyota Supplier Support Center. Yes. And Steve Spear was, sharing his recollections of how Mr. Oba would go into a workplace and he would go and talk to an individual and ask, from whom does this work come? looking up to the internal supplier, and Steve was remembering that Mr. Oba wanted a name, not to single out or blame, but in terms of relationships and respect. It was like, well, Steve said, well, the answer would be, well, that comes from Alice, not that comes from final inspection. And, Mr. Oba really emphasized, then who is your customer for this work? So I guess it's a roundabout way of asking either, did you have a chance to work with Mr. Oba, or do those ideas in general, I mean, how does that, that approach to looking at a process resonate with you and what you teach?
Sure. So I didn't have the opportunity to work with Mr. Oba. I have worked with people from TSSC over the years, and it resonates a great deal because it really gets back into, I find internally in our network, we tend to distinguish an internal person that we're handing our work off to from an external customer. And the problem that creates is no matter where we are in the process, it's going to end up at an external customer, right? So it's sometimes difficult to coach. Well, I'm just handing it over to Bob that works next beside me, and he's going to give it to Alice, and I know them. We're all friends who work together. Okay, but if you pass a defect, then they've got to either catch it or fix it or give it back to you, right? And if they miss it, it goes out the door. The customer gets it. So your customer can be the next person in line, which is important to know, but we want to know that you're part of that supply delivery to that customer experience, that end customer, even somebody internal. And we tend to lower that and like, oh, it'll be fine. It's internal. It's no.
I'm going to throw off the cuff question at you here. Sure. It's a question that it seems like a Toyota-ish question because I was taught that this would often be asked. So not to put you on the spot, but Keith, in your role as Raymond Lean Management System / TPS Manager, what are your top 3 challenges right now in that work?
Sure. Well, they're fun to look at those and break them down. The first is we're serving the network. So finding out what type of coaching and training we need to develop to help that network. A lot of times I mentioned Toyota's got an immersive environment already. So one of my ROM associates, she works with me. She taught English as a foreign language and English as a second language. If you're in an English immersive environment, learning English pretty easily. If you're in France and you're trying to learn English, not so many people speak it. If they do, they have a heavy French accent. It's going to be more difficult. So the first is how do we, build upon and create that immersive environment support. The other piece is, getting more people at a level to kind of, we're kind of building a pyramid, if you will. How do we get those, what we call champions of this process up to draw in more people with them? Because ultimately we want the whole network to be thinking like this. And then find those opportunities to better support our customer to improve that customer experience one by one. So it's really, it's getting that coaching to the network, getting those champions to help lead it, and then really converting that to just the best possible customer experience. And those are really big opportunities, but we're going to get to it because we're going to just break them down into those manageable bites. So, and there's days, Mark, I won't kid you, I look at that and I go, I'm just overwhelmed. Coach yourself, breathe. What's the next step? What's the next step? And it's difficult. I tell people, a lot of times when I'm helping others, I'm doing a lot of self-coaching. So,
yeah, that's a good point. So thanks for letting me put you on the hot seat. But I figured that wouldn't be a difficult question for you to answer, and you knew, I guess, right off what those challenges were. So maybe it's just before moving on from that in general, what are your thoughts on prioritizing? Because I was always taught that question about what are your top 3 challenges is partly to test how a leader is prioritizing things. How do you coach others around prioritizing, especially early on when we are not Toyota and we may see waste everywhere?
Sure.
Is it a matter of lots of baby steps in parallel, or how would you try to prioritize bigger challenges?
Well, one of the early ways it comes in, and people will overwhelm themselves, it's a common problem that they get very excited about this and they start trying to do everything. One of the things I learned, and this is another one of those examples of self-coaching. What is your customer's priority? Because a lot of times we'll start making changes, assuming, I'm going to do my air quotes, assuming we know, but we didn't go talk to them.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a great example. I developed some what I call operational training, which is the pyramids, early just-in-time and quality training. And with incredibly consistent feedback, they wanted to learn the concept of weak point management before we talked about some of the smaller breakouts of, PDCA and et cetera. I really didn't want to do it in that sequence, but everybody, but you know what? I defer to my customer because they wanted to understand why we were walking into all these other pieces. And so the receipt of it was better because I was giving customer experience. Now, is that the way I would have thought to deliver it? Mark, it's not. But you know what? I'm not the target audience.
Right.
And so the same thing with the terminology we talked about earlier. I've been around the Japanese for many years. I'm comfortable with it. I had to learn it. And at first I wasn't comfortable either. I'm comfortable with it now. So I'm over that paradigm shift. But you know what? The people I'm responsible to, I need to convert to English. Yeah. So it's all good. It's whatever that customer needs. So what is the customer priority, and give focus to that? Because a lot of times it can surprise us.
Mm-hmm. And my challenge for healthcare listeners in the audience, I think that question extends really well. What do our patients really prioritize? Instead of, and don't fall into the trap of assuming, but go and ask. Does a little bit of efficiency matter? Or, I would always, make the argument that, to me, the best patient experience is a safe patient experience. So are we working on things that are maybe somewhat superficial, or are we working on the most important issues related to harm and death that could occur as the result of medical error? That's my challenge for the audience. I don't know, any thoughts or inspirational words around that, Keith?
Sure. So one of the other areas I coach on, if you're looking for priorities, is we're very specific of how we put out the metric areas. Mark, you've probably come across these. It's safety, quality, cost, delivery, morale, and environment. Yeah. And safety is always the first.
Meaning beyond work environment, meaning like impact on the environment.
Yeah. Yes, we're talking about the total environment. We want to measure that. A lot of facilities I've worked with are zero landfill facilities, and I love to use those examples. Yeah. They didn't become zero landfill, in one swoop. They started with, well, let's recycle all this paper we're printing, and let's recycle some aluminum cans. And it comes in phases. It's one of my favorite examples. And then larger facilities have on-site restaurant food service. One of the last things they'll recover is usually that leftover food. They do compost, right? So, but that's over time. But it's just such a great example of you can't throw out anything. What? I can't throw? No, but you're going to get there through phases. It's an achievable target because others have done it. But safety is always. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Well, I was going to say, I think zero harm, or really eliminating harm to staff or patients, may seem overwhelming, but I was going to suggest it's many steps to get there, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But to your point, safety is the first and quality is the second. Give those areas focus.
Yes. Even going back to my days in the auto industry 20 plus years ago, it was SQDC. And then people also started talking about morale. And then I less often, or more recently here, environment being added to that. You might be interested, when I was working with a hospital lab in a children's hospital, this is over 12 years ago, we were trying to engage everybody in Kaizen, or they use the word Kaizen, but we could call it continuous improvement or what.
Sure.
And there was a big focus on serving patients, making your work easier. And then as that culture started to grow, because of the interest of people in the group, there was a large number of people on the staff that really started gravitating towards environmental issues of reducing single-use plastic in lab operations and looking at different alternatives. And that was very self-motivated, or it was self-initiated for that broader purpose of the environment and the planet. So like you said, when you make it fun and you make it easy for people to participate in that, they'll do it.
Well said, Mark. Well said.
So one other thing I wanted to ask you to touch on, you mentioned earlier the idea of learning from mistakes, and bad
Yes.
assumptions can be a form of mistake. I remember having drilled into my head, I think of like Tracy and Ernie Richardson, who are retired Toyota, always emphasizing, what do you know and how do you know it? Because that was drilled into them. And those are really useful questions. So we might learn we've made a mistake, an assumption. Maybe more broadly, how do you create an environment where it's safe to embrace mistakes as a way of learning and getting better? How do you work on doing that at Raymond?
That's a great question, and it's one we try to tackle every day, and it's one we're trying to break down because it goes back to the early piece you said, respect and challenge. We have to have those values in there, and it has to become part of a culture of thinking. One of the examples I use always is because we're a large extent a service organization, right? When something breaks, we go fix it. So we that resonates to our solutions and support centers because they have service teams, right? So look, if we can't find what's broken, we can't fix it. So we've got to find what's broken so we can fix it. Just because we don't know it's there, it's still broken and it's still not functioning the way we want. So we've got to uncover it. But it's a big challenge and can be very frustrating. It's an easy paradigm to say, well, if Joe can't do it fast enough, I'll put Mary in there and she'll do it fast. Right. It's very easy to become people focused, right. But really you might have someone that can just execute a poor process more rapidly, but it's still not sustainable. They might have some talent or some knack to it, but that's not a sustainable process build. And we want to teach that. So we teach it that it's a good thing. And that's a big challenge for us to overcome, Mark. I won't kid you. We have a lot of problem with that one because it's difficult people are taught from young up, we're taught that if you're the one found the mistake, it might be your mistake. Now it's on you. So we have to almost untrain some of that. Yes. and change that paradigm, that thinking to finding something that's wrong is good because now we have the opportunity to fix it. And we've got to look at it as opportunity. Yes. And so one of the things we've done is typically we will say defect, right? But a lot of times we'll start calling it disruption. We don't want a customer disruption. And it's a little less, defects like, oh, something's wrong. That's not, however we have to call it out. If it's a disruption to the customer experience, fine, call it out. But make it where we can embrace it as an opportunity because that's what it is. It really is. We're employed because we fix things. Mm-hmm. We make something better, and that's why we have jobs. So I think that's a good thing.
And at least I believe with current technology, robots are not able to learn and get better and improve the process. If there are times where we have, back to the priorities of safety and quality, I always had drilled into my head from my mentors, we only automate something if it is safer for the people working there. And there might be some cases where, like if you go to see a Toyota assembly plant, some welding is better done by robots, some painting is better done by robots, and some painting is still done by hand.
Yes.
Or by people, yes. I should say, with sprayers. But so yeah, engaging everybody in that improvement, really important. And when we attempt improvements, we plan and we test and we study, we may learn it didn't go as we predicted, and that's learning. So I'm going to give a quick plug, and you might be interested in it, Keith, and maybe I'll have you as a guest because when I brought up mistakes, you chuckled, and I know from what we've talked before, you're like me, like, yeah, we make mistakes all the time. My new podcast called My Favorite Mistake, where we have people reflect on mistakes, a mistake that was a particularly important learning experience in their journey. So I'm going to give a quick plug.
Absolutely.
You might want to also go find My Favorite Mistake. So maybe one other question for you, because I think it's really interesting where you're positioned, being part of Toyota Industries, having been part of it for 20 years, and clearly still being in this stage of a quote unquote journey of still progressing and teaching and learning from Toyota. It seems like there's a big difference between being Toyota versus, if you will, trying to become Toyota, as you mentioned, that unlearning process and changing paradigms. I'm curious what else you've learned having come in to Raymond from other parts of Toyota. How would you articulate that challenge? And again, this maybe isn't the best way of saying it, of being Toyota versus becoming Toyota.
So that's a great question, Mark, because, and it's one we wrestle with a little bit at Raymond. There's a great history in the Raymond Corporation of quality and customer experience and delivering, top levels of product and cutting edge technologies for the time. So that how we integrate this system, which is different a little bit, right? It's a way to speed that thinking up and really make it faster or better. It's like adding a richer soil to the seed, right? The seed's growing and the plant's doing well, but we want it to do even better. So we want that soil to be even richer for the progress to take a stronger, better root and have a better experience. One of the advantages I really feel and why I've enjoyed the Raymond side is Raymond's had the challenge to learn the system really to a large extent from the ground up. And that is a bit of an advantage in some ways because when you're a Toyota facility, you just assume everything's Toyota, right? But when you're a Raymond facility, you're like, well, you've got to become a continuous improvement. You're like, oh, I've got the paradigm is I've got to do everything. And you're like, breathe, you're going to be fine. But yes. So it's been a fun challenge. As a result, we've had to put a lot more detailed early training experiences together to teach so many of those things. We started earlier talking about what's common sense. Well, when you start calling things common sense, you feel like, wow, everybody must know it. It's common sense, right? We don't. It's that counterintuitive piece you mentioned. So we've put a lot more focus in the training and the coaching piece to be more structured with it and to really be able to give positive feedback on success. And that's measured by the hands-on. It's great that you take our classes. We love to have you in classes. We love to teach. But if you don't go back to the workplace or even your home or do something with it differently, it was waste by our definition, right? You didn't change. Mm-hmm. So we don't want you to just sit through a class. We want you to go back and see the world a little differently and approach it a little differently, piece by piece. And we've had to do that really from the ground up. So the good thing is having done it from the ground up, lots more learning and, lots more mistakes we've had the opportunity to learn from. So good experience we've tucked under our belt.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier doing Kaizen at home. Maybe final question. I sometimes ask more than one final question.
You're fine. I always enjoy talking to you, Mark. You go on as long as you need. I'm fine.
Well, maybe we'll do another podcast because this has been really great talking with you and hearing from you. But how often do people take those first baby steps with Kaizen at home and then come bring some of that experience or enthusiasm back into their work?
So right now in a COVID environment, a lot of our projects are done at home. But even pre-COVID changes, some of my best, I'll call them proteges or people that become really students of continuous improvement and really own that journey for themselves and stay on that path once they get on it. Some of the best ones started at home. One of my favorites, she was a manager in the rental area, and she came back and she had done her laundry area for her kids. They kept putting the clothes wrong, and she just got very frustrated, and she wanted to teach them how to sort because eventually she, as they got older, maybe you could help do the laundry or fold or something, right? And she did this fabulous visuals of how to separate the colors and the whites, and she did these instructions up there, and she's like, oh my gosh, my kids enjoy doing laundry now. They could help because they understood their contribution, right? They understood their value add. And so she brought that back to work and she was on fire. She's like, we can make this. She felt empowered, I think is the word I'm looking for. She felt empowered to be able to make those improvements at work because she'd made them at home. I've had people challenge me and said, oh, people have to get support to do this. I'm like, at certain levels, yes, but I have yet to come across the manager that is not okay with you having an organized workspace, just as a start. I'm not saying that you stop your workday and clean up for 8 hours and do nothing else. That's not what I'm saying. But if you're working in and you're getting more organized as you go, I haven't seen a manager yet that challenges that. So again, just doing it at home gives you that feeling that you really can do it. Now, I will also caution, make sure your family's a little bit involved, because I've also had some, my spouse or my partner, they're going to kill me because, I didn't throw out their stuff. Oh, don't do that. Don't do that. And then they're going to blame me.
Yeah, I don't know if that's better to learn at home or worse to learn at home, but there are lessons there. It's one thing to, let's say, rearrange your own dresser drawers versus rearranging somebody else's stuff. That wouldn't be a good idea in the workplace, and yeah, I'm sure that's not a good idea at home.
Yeah, I've got a few nasty emails over the years from both at home and at work for getting into somebody else's area. Like, don't do that. Be respectful. Oh, we have an opportunity to coach. Be respectful. It's not yours. Yep. We understand. I didn't need it. I wasn't using it. Yes, because it's not yours. You weren't supposed to be using it.
Well, that's a great kind of final reminder around engaging people, working with others. And then one other key point I'm drawing out of what you said earlier is I love your phrase, work readiness. It's not necessarily organization for organization's sake, even though that might not be bad if it's self-directed.
Sure.
But thinking about the purpose and the reason for doing that, even more important.
Yes, absolutely. It starts there. If your workspace is work ready, then moving on to that, delivering that best possible customer experience makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
And if you don't have what you need, you begin to fail right there. So
that's a solvable problem.
It is.
Well, our guest today has been Keith Ingels from Raymond. You say Raymond Corporation?
Yes.
Yes, I thought that's what it was. Raymond Corporation. I'll put links in the show notes for anyone who's just listening. What's the website? Do you have resources on the website about the Raymond Lean Management approach?
Yes, it's raymondcorp.com. We have some information out there, and we do white papers, and our marketing group does a great job putting things out. So by all means, reach out to us and let us know what you're looking at, and certainly reach out to myself or some of our marketing team. We'll try to help you out. But we do a lot of white paper resources out there, and we're doing more and more customer ready training as well. We're vetting a lot of our internal training out to make it customer friendly. So we're working on we've got some e-learnings and things coming out. Some are in process and several are available now. So look forward to helping you on your lean journey as well.
Well, thanks for that, Keith. And I'll look for some more specific links. Like you said, white papers, other resources that I can put in the show notes. So, and for those who are just listening and not watching, won't notice, Keith, like almost always Toyota people, he's wearing a red shirt. I feel bad. Like, yeah, there's a logo even. I don't have a logo shirt, but shoot, I should have worn a red. When we chatted the first time, I had a red polo shirt on. I should have done that again. But
yeah, I like red. It looks good. It looks good on you, Mark.
So if anyone is just listening, this episode, like many of the other recent episodes, is available on the YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, you might be learning that it's also available as an audio podcast. So we try to meet people where they are and how they want to consume information. But Keith, you've really shared a lot of great tips and insights and reminders I think are really useful for the audience. So I really appreciate that. And thank you for being here today.
That was a great pleasure, Mark. Thanks very much for letting me join you.
Yeah, of course.